Before the Transcontinental Railroad, traveling across the United States was a brutal and uncertain journey. A trip from the East Coast to California could take months by wagon, stagecoach, or ship. Travelers faced disease, rough terrain, dangerous river crossings, extreme weather, and the constant risk of delay or death. The nation was expanding westward, but the vast distance between the Atlantic and Pacific remained one of the greatest obstacles in American life. Then came one of the boldest projects of the 19th century, the construction of a railroad that would cross the continent and change the nation forever. The Transcontinental Railroad was far more than a transportation project. It was a symbol of ambition, engineering, expansion, and national unity. It linked the eastern United States with the Pacific coast in a way that had never been possible before. It transformed trade, travel, communication, migration, and the economy. But it was also built through dangerous labor, intense competition, political maneuvering, and the sacrifice of thousands of workers whose stories were often left out of the history books. The dream of a railroad to the Pacific had existed for years before construction began. As the United States acquired more Western territory and more settlers moved west, the need for faster transportation grew stronger. The California Gold Rush made that need even more urgent. Business leaders, politicians, and citizens all understood that the country needed a way to connect its distant regions. But there was a major problem: politics. Leaders in the North and South argued fiercely over where such a railroad should run. Each side wanted the route to favor its own economic and political interests. For years, disagreement kept the project stalled. Only after the Civil War began did the federal government finally act. In 1862, Congress passed the Pacific Railroad Act, which authorized the construction of a transcontinental line and provided government support in the form of bonds and land grants. Two railroad companies would carry out the project. The Central Pacific Railroad would build eastward from Sacramento, California. The Union Pacific Railroad would build westward from the Missouri River region. Wherever those two lines met, the railroad would be complete. The idea was simple on paper. In reality, it was one of the hardest construction projects in American history. The Central Pacific faced the massive wall of the Sierra Nevada. These mountains were steep, rocky, snow-covered, and unforgiving. Workers had to cut paths through granite, blast tunnels through solid rock, build bridges and trestles, and lay track in conditions that pushed human endurance to its limits. Winter storms buried camps in snow. Avalanches threatened crews. Freezing temperatures and dangerous cliffs made every day a risk. In some places, progress was painfully slow. Men worked for weeks just to advance a short distance. To blast tunnels through the mountains, workers used black powder and later more powerful explosives. They were lowered over cliffs in baskets to chip away at rock faces. They worked surrounded by danger, where one wrong move could lead to an explosion, a fall, or death under collapsing stone. This was not glamorous work. It was exhausting, terrifying, and often deadly. Yet the railroad pushed forward. Much of this success was due to Chinese laborers, whose contributions were essential to the building of the Central Pacific. Thousands of Chinese workers were hired, and over time, they became the great majority of the Central Pacific workforce. These men performed some of the most dangerous and difficult labor on the project. They blasted tunnels, cleared rock, graded the land, hauled supplies, and laid track through the mountains. They worked in freezing weather, under harsh discipline, and in constant danger. For many years, their central role in building the railroad was minimized or ignored in popular history. But the truth is clear. Without the Chinese workers, the Central Pacific could not have completed its part of the line as it did. Meanwhile, the Union Pacific faced a different landscape. Its crews moved westward across the Great Plains. At first glance, the open plains may have seemed easier than the mountains, but they brought their own challenges. Workers had to deal with heat, cold, wind, supply shortages, rough camp life, and the uncertainty of building across a vast frontier. The Union Pacific workforce included many Irish immigrants, Civil War veterans, and other labourers seeking work and wages. Their job was grueling, repetitive, and physically punishing. Day after day, they graded land, positioned ties, laid rails, and drove spikes as the track advanced mile by mile. The building of the railroad became a race. Because the government rewarded each company with money and land based on how much track it laid, both the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific had a strong incentive to build as fast as possible. This created fierce competition. Surveyors pushed routes forward, work crews raced to claim territory, executives fought over miles, money, and influence. In some places, rival crews even laid track beyond what was truly necessary, trying to gain more rewards before the final meeting point was settled. The race to build the railroad was not just about engineering. It was about profit, prestige, and power. As the tracks stretched farther west and east, the railroad began to reshape the land even before it was completed. Temporary camps and rough towns sprang up along the construction route. Merchants, gamblers, saloon owners, speculators, and laborers followed the advancing rails. These settlements often appeared almost overnight, and many were wild, unstable places full of opportunity and disorder. The railroad was already creating a new kind of frontier, one built not around wagon trails, but around steel rails and locomotives. The project also had enormous consequences for Native American communities. As the railroad pushed westward, it opened the interior of the continent to faster settlement, military movement, commercial expansion, and resource extraction. Lands that had long belonged to indigenous peoples came under increasing pressure. The railroad helped accelerate a process of displacement and disruption that would have devastating effects across the West. For some Americans, the railroad represented progress and national unity. For many Native communities, it marked a dangerous new stage of invasion and loss. After years of labor, danger, and competition, the two lines finally approached one another in Utah Territory. The nation had watched the progress closely. The completion of the railroad was seen as a historic event, a sign that the United States had overcome distance and geography to bind itself together from coast to coast. On May 10, 1869, the Central Pacific and Union Pacific met at Promontory Summit, Utah. There, officials, guests, and railroad leaders gathered for the famous ceremony marking the completion of the first Transcontinental Railroad. The most famous symbol of that day was the driving of the final spike, often called the Golden Spike. It was a ceremonial moment, rich with symbolism. Locomotives from each railroad faced one another, representing the union of East and West. Photographs were taken, speeches were made, and the country celebrated a new era. The image of that ceremony became one of the best-known pictures in American history. It showed a nation proud of its technological achievement and eager to present the railroad as a triumph of vision and determination. But the photograph also reflected the way history was often told at the time. Railroad executives and officials were clearly visible. Many of the workers who had actually built the railroad, especially the Chinese laborers, were absent from the celebration's most famous images and from much of the public praise that followed. Still, the significance of the moment was undeniable. The continent had been connected by rail. The impact was immediate and dramatic. What had once taken months could now be done in about a week. Travel became faster, cheaper, and more predictable. Goods could move across the country with far greater speed. Mail and communication improved. Businesses gained access to distant markets. Settlers found it easier to move west. Investors saw new possibilities. The railroad helped create a more integrated national economy and made the United States feel smaller, faster, and more connected than ever before. The Transcontinental Railroad also helped standardize and modernize the nation in broader ways. It strengthened the economic ties between regions. It encouraged the growth of towns and cities along the route. It fueled industries such as steel, coal, and manufacturing. It made large-scale movement of agricultural products, consumer goods, and raw materials far more efficient. In many ways, it was one of the great engines of American industrial growth. But this progress came at a cost. The work had been dangerous and often deadly. Countless laborers suffered injury, exhaustion, and loss. Many deaths were poorly recorded, or not recorded at all. Corruption and financial manipulation stained parts of the railroad era as companies and political figures exploited the enormous money involved. The expansion encouraged by the railroad also intensified the dispossession of native peoples and reshaped Western lands in ways that benefited some while devastating others. That is why the Transcontinental Railroad remains such a powerful subject in American history. It is not simply a story of triumph. It is a story of contradictions. It represents innovation and